Welcome to Folk Stories, where betrayal sparks the fire, and revenge builds empires. Today's tale begins with flames, but ends with a queen's footsteps shaking the village that tried to erase her. In the small, dusty village of Mapendo, 17-year-old Zubri lived quietly with her old grandmother. Their hut was made of mud and straw, small but full of love. Every day, Zubri and her grandmother made colorful baskets with their hands and sold them in the market to buy food. They didn't have much, but they had each other. Zubri was kind, smart, and beautiful, things that should have made people proud. But instead, it made some people angry. Whispers began. People said she was strange, too quiet, too lucky. Some even said she was a witch. Jealousy is a slow poison, and soon, the lies spread like wildfire. One dark night, as the moon hid behind clouds, a group of villagers came with torches. While Zubri and her grandmother slept, they set the hut on fire. The flames roared, the smoke rose, and her grandmother screamed. But no one came to help. They wanted her gone. They wanted her erased, like a name scratched off a wall. They believed she would die in the fire, and with her, the fear they had created. But fate had other plans. The fire swallowed the house, but not her spirit. What they didn't know was that you can't burn a soul meant to rise. They thought they were ending her story, but they were only lighting the first spark. Zubri's body was found the next morning, barely breathing, hidden under the ashes and broken wood of what used to be her home. Her skin was burned, her clothes turned to dust, and her eyes were shut tight, as if she was holding on to her last breath. Everyone thought she was dead. But fate, once again, had other plans. A quiet old man, a herbalist from the faraway Kasanga Mountains, happened to pass through the village outskirts. He noticed the smoke still rising in the distance and followed the smell of fire and ash. When he reached the ruins, he heard a faint sound, a breath, a soft cry, something almost too quiet to notice. He dug through the ashes with his hands, and there she was. Broken, but alive. Without saying a word to anyone, he wrapped her in his old cloak and carried her back to the mountains. The Kasanga Mountains were a place few people visited. Cold winds, thick forests, and deep silence filled the air. It was there, in a small hut hidden between tall trees, that Zubri slowly opened her eyes. She couldn't speak at first. Her body ached, her face was covered in healing leaves and herbs, and her heart felt like a stone. But the old herbalist didn't rush her. He didn't ask questions. He just cared for her. Day by day, Zubri learned to move again. She watched him make medicines from roots and flowers. She helped grind leaves, mix powders, and heal small animals. Slowly, her hands remembered how to work, and her mind began to clear. She learned to make fire again, not the kind that burns homes, but the kind that warms, heals, and lights the dark. Time passed. Months turned into years. Zubri stayed hidden in those mountains, far from the village that tried to kill her. She studied deeply, herbs, healing, trade, and silence. She learned how to survive with little, how to listen to nature, and how to keep her anger locked away. She didn't forget the night of the fire, but she didn't let it control her. The pain became her teacher. The silence became her power. And the patience she learned became her weapon. People from far villages started coming to the herbalist for cures, and soon they met the young woman with quiet eyes and steady hands. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know her past. They only knew she could heal them. And Zubri never told them. She smiled gently, gave them what they needed, and watched them leave with relief in their hearts. No one guessed that this was the same girl who had once been called a witch, the same girl left to die in fire. She had changed. Her body was stronger. Her eyes were sharper. And her spirit was quiet, but powerful. She made a promise to herself: she would rise, not with noise or revenge, but with skill, patience, and silent strength. The world would know her, but not yet. Her time would come. And when it did, she would not come back as the girl they burned. She would return as the woman who walked through fire, and lived. Years passed, and the girl who was once Zubari no longer looked like the scared child who escaped the fire. She gave herself a new name, Malkia, which means, queen. She wanted no one to recognize her. She wanted no pity, no questions, no ties to the past. Malkia became quiet like the wind but powerful like a storm. Using everything she had learned in the mountains, she began to create powerful herbal medicines, ones that could heal sicknesses others couldn't. Her knowledge, her hands, and her silence became her tools. She began trading with travelers, healers, and merchants who passed by. They carried her medicines across villages, then across borders, and soon, across the entire continent. Her name was whispered in royal halls and busy markets. Kings, queens, and leaders sent messengers in secret to find the source of the miracle cures. They called her, the Lady of Leaves, never knowing her face, only trusting the power of her healing. Malkia never showed herself fully. She worked in the shadows, sending trusted people to handle her deals. Her business grew quietly, like a tree growing deep roots. She bought land, opened healing centers, trained women and girls to learn her craft. She gave jobs to widows, orphans, and people forgotten by society, people like she once was. And still, no one knew who she really was. No one remembered the name Zubari. No one thought about the Witch of Mapendo. That name had died in the fire. In her place stood Malkia, rich, wise, powerful, and untouchable. She wore fine clothes now, deep green robes, gold bracelets, and a quiet crown of herbs and beads. But she never became arrogant. She walked with grace and kept her words few. People respected her, feared her power, and wondered about her past. But Malkia never answered. She let the mystery grow, and with it, her empire. Her medicines were sold in bottles wrapped with hand-woven cloth, a quiet reminder of the baskets she and her grandmother once made. Every time she saw them, she remembered the small hut, the fire, the screams. But she didn't cry. That pain had been turned into gold, into power, into peace. She became one of the richest women in all of Wakanda, owning lands, houses, schools, and healing centers. But still, she stayed in the shadows. People tried to find out who she was, but no one ever guessed. The woman healing the rich and powerful was once the girl they left to burn. Malkia had risen, not by shouting or seeking revenge, but by turning her wounds into wisdom and her silence into strength. While others chased fame, Malkia built a kingdom of roots, leaves, and quiet revenge. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that survives, thrives, and one day returns, when no one expects it. The village of Mapendo was no longer the place it used to be. The trees were dry, the rivers had shrunk, and the air felt heavy with sadness. The markets were almost empty. People struggled to find food and water. The once happy songs of the children were gone. Laughter had disappeared, replaced by quiet whispers and tired faces. Years had passed, but the fire they started that night had never really gone out. It had burned more than just a house, it had cursed the whole village with guilt, regret, and bad luck. The people had tried to forget, but something always felt broken. The elders met often, searching for a solution. Then one day, they made a special announcement: a wealthy stranger had offered to buy the land of Mapendo, not just some houses, but the whole village. And not only that, the buyer promised to rebuild it, bring jobs, and give the people a better life. Hope returned like a breeze after a long drought. People cleaned the streets. Women wore their best clothes. Children stood in neat lines. Everyone gathered at the village square to welcome the mysterious savior. They whispered to each other, wondering who it could be. Maybe a rich king. Maybe someone from the city. Then, they heard it, the soft purr of a luxury car rolling into the village. It was long, black, and shining like nothing they had ever seen. It stopped in front of the crowd. A driver stepped out and opened the door slowly. Out stepped a woman. Tall. Calm. Dressed in green silk, with golden bracelets that glowed in the sun. She looked powerful, almost unreal. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then someone gasped. Then another. And suddenly, all eyes grew wide with shock and fear. It was her. The girl they had once called a witch. The girl they had tried to kill. But she wasn't a girl anymore. She was a queen. Malkia. Their mouths dropped open, and many dropped to their knees without thinking. No one could speak. The woman they thought had died was now standing in front of them, alive, rich, and stronger than ever. She looked around, her eyes cold but calm. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, tall and unshaken. The elders tried to speak, but no words came out. Children who had only heard stories about her now saw the legend with their own eyes. Mothers covered their faces in shame. Men looked down, unable to meet her gaze. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone was enough. They all knew what they had done. And they all knew, she remembered. But still, she had returned. Not with fire. Not with anger. But with power. The kind of power that doesn't shout, it simply arrives. In that moment, Mapendo bowed, not because they were told to, but because they understood, the woman they had once tried to erase now owned the ground they stood on. The air felt heavy as she stood before the crowd. The sun was high, but a strange chill ran through the village. Everyone was silent, watching the woman they once left to die. Her green dress moved gently in the breeze, and the gold on her arms sparkled. But it was her face that held their eyes. Her skin, though smooth and regal, still showed the faint scars from the fire, reminders of what they did. And yet, she wore those scars with pride, like medals from a war she had survived. Her eyes scanned the people, old neighbors, familiar faces, the very ones who had whispered lies, thrown stones, and lit the fire. They couldn't even look at her now. She took one calm step forward. The village elders tried to step in front, acting as if they were still in charge, but even they knew the truth now, they had no power in front of her. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried through the air like thunder. "I'm not here for revenge," she said, and a few people let out a small breath, unsure whether to feel relief or shame. "I'm here to buy every inch of the land you tried to bury me in." Her words hung in the air. Even the wind stopped for a second, as if the world itself was listening. No one knew what to say. No one dared to question her. The papers were already ready. She didn't need to negotiate. She didn't come to ask, she came to take what was already hers. The land of Mapendo, once filled with hate and fire, now belonged to the girl they tried to erase. A team of lawyers stepped out of the car behind her. Builders, engineers, and planners followed. They handed the contracts to the elders, who signed with trembling hands. It was done. In just minutes, the village was no longer theirs. It belonged to Malkia. Every tree, every hut, every grain of dirt was now under her name. People whispered to each other in disbelief. Some cried. Some tried to speak, to say sorry, but she didn't respond. She wasn't there for apologies. She had spent years in silence, growing strong while they forgot her. And now, she didn't need their words. Her presence said everything. The girl who once had nothing had returned to own everything. And she didn't need fire or revenge to do it. She used power, grace, and purpose. The children looked at her with wide eyes, not in fear, but in wonder. They had never seen anyone like her, someone who had been broken and still stood tall. Someone who had been hated and still chose not to hate back. Malkia turned around slowly, walked back to her car, and drove away, leaving the village frozen in place. Nothing would ever be the same again. That day, the wind didn't move. The birds didn't sing. The sky itself seemed to pause, because everyone knew something deep had just changed. The land they used to own now had a new queen. And her name was Malkia. The people of Mapendo never imagined they would one day stand in front of the same girl they once tried to destroy, heads down, hands out, begging for work. The village was broken. The land was dry, the wells were empty, and there was no one left to blame but themselves. Malkia, the name whispered now with fear and awe, had returned not just with power, but with control. And strangely, with opportunity. She had bought the land, rebuilt the village, and opened a healing center right where her old hut had once stood, the same hut they had set on fire with her inside. Now, on those very ashes, stood a beautiful white building with shining windows, clean walls, and a symbol of a leaf wrapped in gold, her emblem. It was more than a building. It was a message. When she announced that the center was hiring, the villagers rushed to apply. They had no pride left, only hunger and regret. And Malkia, calm and quiet, gave them jobs, but not ones they expected. She didn't put them in offices or give them titles. No. She made them janitors. Cleaners. Security guards. The same people who once laughed at her pain were now sweeping her floors. The ones who had whispered, which now scrubbed the walls of the very place where healing happened. Every morning, they put on uniforms with her name stitched across the chest. They walked past her portrait in the main hallway. And every time they bent down to clean the tiles, they knew what lay beneath, the soil where her childhood ended in flames. No one dared complain. No one dared look her in the eye. She walked through the center often, calm, regal, and quiet. She didn't shout. She didn't punish. She didn't speak much at all. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any scream. Her presence alone made hearts drop and hands tremble. The healing center thrived. Patients came from faraway places. People from the city, the rich, the powerful, all wanted Malkia's herbal cures. But the villagers only wanted her forgiveness. And they would never get it in words. She gave them work, but not peace. That had to be earned, and maybe never would. She didn't mock them, didn't remind them of the past. But she didn't forget either. Every time they mopped the floor, cleaned a room, or opened the gates for visitors, they were reminded of what they had done. And who she had become because of it. Sometimes, late at night, the villagers sat together and whispered about the old days, about the fire, the lies, the hate. They wondered if she would ever speak to them with warmth. But she remained distant. Focused. Kind to those who needed help, but cold to those who once held the match. The taste of regret is bitter. But Malkia let them drink it slowly, day by day. Not to punish them, but to teach them. That no fire, no lie, and no hate could bury someone born to rise. One quiet morning, as the sun painted golden light over the rooftops of Mapendo, a little girl ran up to Malkia outside the healing center. She had big, curious eyes and a soft voice. "Are you still angry at them?" she asked, pointing toward the villagers who now worked in silence, cleaning the same ground they once tried to bury Malkia beneath. For a moment, Malkia looked out across the village, at the homes, the people, the soil that held her pain and her victory. Then she turned to the child and gave a small, warm smile. "No," she said softly, "I thank them. If they hadn't tried to burn me, I would have never known I was fireproof." Her words were calm, but they carried the strength of storms. The child didn't fully understand, but she smiled back, somehow feeling that something important had been said. Malkia gently touched the girl's head and kept walking, her long dress brushing the ground, her golden bangles catching the sunlight like little crowns on her wrists. As she walked through the streets of Mapendo, the village that once turned against her, every head bowed. Not out of fear, but out of deep respect. No one dared to speak. They all knew who she was now. Not just a woman. Not just a healer. But a legend. Her name, Malkia, whispered through the streets like wind, a reminder that from the ashes of betrayal, a queen had risen. And her crown was made not of gold, but of flame.